to Simpler. We are three pastors, husbands, and fathers on a journey to make life simpler by holding Jesus as the core for every belief and practice. This journey has shaped us to be more like Christ, freed us from the shame of failure, and encouraged us to a deeper love of our Lord and God. We invite you to join us in the discussions that have shaped and continue to shape our lives.
And I was just like, it was gonna be so bad.
Y'all seen those videos with the chiropractors where like they'll like pop someone's back and the person will go
No, like for real videos.
It's so funny, man.
Well, like, yeah, you know, now just relax. But I was just like, and I was like, man, I'm just getting to know these guys. And I was like, I don't want to rip one, you know? So
there was one time at Hastings, I similar situation where like my stomach didn't feel that great. And I was like, but I have to get work done. And I was in this aisle and I had like at Hastings, I had gotten good from my perspective, good at like silent farting. And so like there was a room or like,
you also don't hear very well.
That's true. Yeah. I was like, yeah, that'd be so funny, dude. Just like crazy loud. Like, no one heard it. But I was alphabetizing DVDs and there was like 5 or 6 people in there and I was like, I'm okay. Like it'll be, I've had a couple this morning. Like I'll just be silent like I was earlier. So I could position myself and no joke, dude. Like, like loud. And there's at least 5 people. And y'all remember the aisles at Hastings. They're not big.
No.
So like I had a DVD and I set it down and I just leave the aisle. And I go to the back room and I'm like, I'm going to chill here for a minute.
Wait for all those people to leave. Have you seen, I don't know if it's a video. I know I've seen it somewhere. I don't know if it's a video or whatever, but it's a friend explaining to their deaf friend that farts make sound.
Oh, yeah.
And the deaf friend is petrified. Yeah. Like, wait, what? Like, I didn't know it made sound. When I was in Lubbock, I just told this story to Michelle the other day, and I had never told it to her, I guess, but when Paradigm started in Lubbock in 1997, I was there. I was part of the leadership team with John Randalls, and our church's worship band made up the worship band for Paradigm. And so I would get there early and I'd listen to them practice and I'd be there to greet people or whatever when they came in. At this point, it's just the band and me. And I'm just sitting on the front and I'm catching up on some of my Bible reading. And I get so into the Bible, like I kind of forget where I am. And I go, oh, and I just rip the loudest fart in the middle of them praying for the service. And they're not 15, 20 feet from me. And it was so loud. And all of them turned to me. And I realized in that moment, I look up and they're all staring at me. And I went, well, there's nothing I can do to deny that. I'm just like,
it was you.
Dang it. And all I could think about was there was a girl on the worship team I really liked, and I was like, well, I just
done.
That's done. And I told Michelle, and she was like, I'm so glad you ripped that fart. You know, she's like, but I hadn't thought about that in forever.
That's funny.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Well, we could tell more fart stories, right?
I have so many of them.
But that's not what we're talking about today. What are we talking about today?
What are we talking about today? Well, we are talking about music.
That's true. There you go.
There's the
Full
segue.
circle.
There's the segue. Yeah. So, no, I mean, not just music, but I had somebody approach me recently and they said, hey, I have a topic for you guys for for a Simpler Pod. And they said, here's my idea. I want to know why you think Christian music, and for that matter, Christian movies, TV shows, whatever, why are they so cheesy? Why are they so bad? And the individual said that they had gotten, I think in somebody else's car, they were driving somebody else's car and they'd gotten in the car and they turned on, the radio was on or something like that. And they heard some music playing and they're like, oh, this is so bad. It's probably Christian. And then when it cut to the people speaking, it was like such and such Christian station. They're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. So they said, I was able to tell that this was Christian before there was anything in the song or anything that indicated that it was Christian because of the quality of it. It was such bad quality. And the individual said, I don't really care what you say, Ryan. They said, I want to hear from Micah and Pierce on this. And so now I turf it to you guys.
But Ryan, friends are friends forever.
Oh, man. When camps used to do talent shows, there would be 3 or 4 different people signed up to sing that. Like, not 3 or 4 people in the same group. That song, that song would be in the talent show 4 times. And it was just like, come on.
We're not that good of friends.
All right.
I have a lot to say. Let me just give you some premises first.
Good.
First of all, not all Christian art is that way.
True. I'm sorry.
It tends to be just what people hear, right? So it's not true that all Christian, let's just go specifically with music for a moment. I'm not sure I can speak to
videography.
The other stuff I don't know, right? But like, not all Christian music is like that. It just tends the stuff they're referring to tends to be the mainstream stuff, right? So, but not all Christian music is that way. Second, and then we can roll with this for a while, Pierce, because you'll appreciate this one. I think part of the reason that it's often Christian music is often bad is because we culturally, at least I'll say it this way, the culture I grew up in was, I'm going to call it the special music culture. The culture where if someone says, hey, I can sing, or hey, I just learned how to play an instrument, people go, let's celebrate that and put you up in front of people and let you play. We don't care how good or bad it is. You're just going to do it because it's a way, and I hated this statement, it's a way for you to use your talents for the Lord's glory. Which is stupid to me, because it seems like when God put musicians together for the temple, they were put together there because they were skilled at what they did, not because they had started playing, right? So I think you perpetuate a culture like that where you say it doesn't really matter how good you are as long as you're good enough to get in front of people and do this, right? I think that's part of it. Is so then you have a generation of people who aren't really pursuing quality, right? Because you're allowed to get away with not quality. So you can have quote unquote success, if you will, by not being very good.
That's a great point. There was an Instagram video I saw the other day, and it was a guy, and he asked the exact same question, like, why is Christian music so bad? But he really highlighted on the worship music side of things, not so much like Christian contemporary or whatever genre. Excuse me. And he said the reason why that like people like Passion and Elevation, these seemingly talented musicians and writers and things, aren't writing extremely complicated, like composing these what we would consider to be great songs, is because Joe Schmo in Idaho has to lead worship this Sunday, and he can't play what you're saying needs to be played. And I think that's a huge part of it, is that there is this understanding culturally that like I obviously this is his opinion. He didn't interview the people from the churches that he listed.
Joe Schmo,
dude. All the comments were like, "Man, this guy's a vendetta against Joe Schmo. Like, what? Joe Schmo stole this guy's job."
My name's Joe Schmo.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
poor Joe.
I know, right? So, like, from what he's saying, like, there's an understanding of like we're not going to go, probably from if we add what you said, Micah, to what he's saying, because the culture has so perpetuated, like you don't have to be as talented or as good or whatever words you want to say there to lead worship on a Sunday or lead worship on a Wednesday or whenever you're doing it, because the culture has become so ingrained in that could feed into the reason why we're not seeing a lot more complicated.
I actually think that I disagree with him. Okay. I think that worship is different.
Okay.
And I feel like I have some expertise to speak into
this,
absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. Worship, I think, is different than like non-worship. We'll just say it that way.
Yeah.
Christian music that's not worship and Christian music that is worship, because like historically, the whole intent of picking melodies for worship was melodies people could sing.
That's a great point. Yeah.
Right.
So it has to be. It has to be for the masses. It
right.
Can't
that's
be.
why. Right. That's why they a lot of times picked. We call them bar songs, but they picked folk songs.
Yeah.
Because people already knew the melodies, and they would put lyrics to those. So I disagree
Not about
with
Joe
him.
Schmo.
No. Because the whole goal has always been melodies that people can pick up and sing quickly.
Exactly.
And what that tends to be is simpler songs, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like you can remember the nursery rhymes from growing up because it's a simple melody, right? Nobody goes, you know what, I'm going to sing Beethoven's Fifth in my head, right? Because it's a very complicated melody. So I disagree.
Some music person out there right now is going, well, actually.
I disagree with him in the premise. I agree with him, I think, in some of the execution. So like what then happens is you have people within specifically worship who are never pressed for quality, right? They're never pressed to get better. You're able to get by, you know what I mean? I'll give you an example. And I'm not a phenomenal guitar player, but I'm incredibly competent at what I do on guitar, right? Like, Grayson led worship for the first time ever, which was awesome.
Yeah.
Cool.
At See You at the Pole at Glen.
That's awesome.
So it was so cool. Yeah. Landra Stanley texted me. She's like, hey, can you come lead worship at See You at the Pole? I was like, hey, I got a better idea. Yeah. Because Grayson's been like practicing, working. Yeah.
That's awesome, man.
So he did Graves into Gardens, and we worked on it. And when we were practicing, you know, a couple days before,
neither of your older boys play, right?
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
No, they don't. They like tinker, but Grayson's working on the song, and he'd get to a spot and he would like sing something wrong or play a wrong chord, and he would stop. And I would be like, hey buddy, you can't practice like that. You got to start practicing as if it's going to be your leading worship, right? So if you mess up, you keep going, right? So we're practicing. I could have left that alone and said, no other kid is going to be able to do as good of a job as he's going to do, even if he like stops. But that's not what we're pushing for, right? The goal specifically in worship is for him to learn how to lead worship, which means not stopping, right? So I'm pushing a 7th grader in the quality of what he needs to do as a worship leader.
That's awesome.
I'm not letting him get away with it, even though it's good enough. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think a lot of times in worship, I think there's reasons for this, but a lot of times we're looking for someone who's good enough. I think part of the problem for a lot of churches is there's just not that many worship leaders. So like you get Joe Schmo in the middle of Idaho.
Exactly. Yeah.
He might not have a lot of options. And I have a whole lot of opinions on that. Like maybe they don't have a lot of options because the church isn't very good and no one wants to come there. Maybe there's not a lot of options because you do a style of music that there's not that many people who are going to play that style. Like there's a lot of reasons, but I think that I disagree with his premise, this guy's, but I think he has a point in terms of quality with worship. That's kind of my thought.
Yeah, absolutely.
On worship, I have a different thought on non-worship.
Yeah. In regards to non-worship, then, do you think that the thing that I've heard in regards to non-worship, the most in regards to being in the music scene and stuff like that, is that most producers and most people, most record labels, they aren't pushing for quality. They're pushing to sell records. And so they know that the primary Christian audience is soccer moms. It's women in their car dropping off kids and just having the Christian music on in the background. Like their primary audience isn't going to be, like, from my perspective, being in the hardcore and metal scene and stuff like that, like there's a level of expectation of technical talent in regards to that scene. And so like they're not going onto that scene. Same thing with people who grew up with typical rock music. The people who grew up in the 70s with AC/DC, Led Zeppelin, like they're not trying to capture that audience. They're just trying to be positive and encouraging, right? Like there's so their goal, So their goal in that isn't
okay. Pierce Love.
I just
see what I did there.
No, you did. Yeah. There you go. Yeah. My sister's initials are K. So I don't know. What's funny is we got on this topic, and I have a lot of thoughts, but they're just not they're not cohesive in discussion, and so like
not a sponsor.
Let me go.
Yeah.
Can I go the other way?
Dude, 100%.
Switchfoot. Love those guys, right?
Yeah,
absolutely. Love them forever. John Foreman, even in his individual stuff, someone could say they don't like it, but I don't think you could take like John Foreman as an independent artist, or even Switchfoot as a whole, and put them up against a secular band and say these two aren't as good, right? I feel like that's different than saying like.
So you're saying they are as good?
They are as good, yes. Yeah. I feel like that's different than taking like a specific. I have to
ask you guys if the people I like are good or not, because I don't know.
Well, I think the differentiation is what we call the genre of Christian contemporary. I think that's probably what he's asking about is Christian contemporary music seems to just all kind of be real cheesy.
Absolutely.
It's actually a joke, I think, in a lot of the worship bands I did camps with back in the day. They'd be like, "Oh, that's CCM, like Christian contemporary music." That was kind of their joke, right? So you have all these Christian bands, it's Christian music that's not CCM, that are outside of that genre, that are actually really, really good,
right?
Really solid, really solid.
Hawk Nelson, I liked Hawk Nelson.
What's funny? So I was actually going to bring up Hawk Nelson. Remind me in a second. I'll let you finish, but I want to bring up Hawk Nelson.
There's some bands like Hawk Nelson who like blend, right? They might have some really good songs, and then they have some Christian contemporary songs.
Yeah.
And so that's what's difficult is like for you, Ryan, this is why I'm gonna slip up and say his name eventually, but like I'm gonna try not to. This is why the person who asked you this said they don't want you to comment, because what the reality is you don't actually know the difference.
I don't.
Right? So like you might think because you grew up in the Christian culture, your perspective of good is based on that. Now I think you've obviously listen to music that's not Christian contemporary music.
Yeah, I listen to a lot of stuff. Yeah.
So there's got to be some level of like recognition that maybe there's distinctions, but I also recognize that not everybody recognizes those distinctions. You might just say like, I like 80s music and I like Christian contemporary, and you might not be able to say why you think those two things are different, right?
Yeah, sure.
So that might be the reality. For Pierce and I, and whoever asked you the question, we're going to be able to say like, wow, this seems like a vast quality difference between even like a switchfoot, and I'm not going to try to disparage a bunch of the CC artists, like, but like then a Christian contemporary artist, we're going to notice it and be like, ugh, right? And
it does have a sound. Like it has a noticeable, recognizable sound.
I think production's a massive thing. So in regards, like, so we've all of us have been to different Christian conferences and events and things like that. And I know a live event's always going to hit harder. You're present, you're in the moment for sure. But I remember so many bands that I've seen, Rock the Desert, Red Letter Rock Fest, these places that I would go to growing up, these Christian festivals, and just be like, why can't the record sound like this? Like,
really?
You built that up so hard, but if you listen to the record, it feels flat the whole time because they don't hit the build up. You don't feel the intensity of that. It feels so flat. And I honestly do think, back to what I was saying earlier, like it's because
built for the radio.
It's built for the radio, like
radio versions.
You don't want to get rowdy, right? Like you don't want that level of it. But like, so that's why there was some album I bought specifically because of the live show, and I probably listened to it once, and I was like, oh man, it just didn't hit at all. And was it because I was reminiscing of the live experience? Probably partially, for sure, but it also is just the production. They're mixing for a very specific audience, not for, I don't know what I want to say. I don't like saying not to be good. I don't like saying that, because they are good in what they're doing. Like they're still fitting that mold, but maybe not for mainstream media. Maybe not for like this. Let's say Hog Nelson's a great example, because Hog Nelson, I remember buying their first album when I was 13. They were like a more punky Relient K at the time. Relient K was more, because Relient K is one of their biggest influences is like Beach Boys. So they still have that really poppy side for sure. But then then Hog Nelson came out and they felt more edgy, and they were like, they're from California. So there's that aspect of it. But as their career has gone on, there's been times where I've seen them live several times, like, man, y'all feel like a punk band. But then I hear your record, and even though it's not it's because they were from Tooth and Nail for a little while, it's not as produced as some of these other places. You're right, Micah, like some of it still blends into that thing. And I remember thinking like, man, I wish I could just lean into it, just because actually, no, they were signed by another record and distributed by Tooth and Nail. And I remember at the time thinking Tooth and Nail would never put out something like exactly like this. And I thought, man, just lean into that, like go towards them and man, I really want to push this. But it's okay. Like I can't, obviously that's just one individual's opinion about it.
Yeah, because that's a business decision.
Absolutely. That's all. So like, and that's why, and maybe for them, they're thinking, cool, because I've heard of that crossroads that certain musicians will get to, especially from like, the only reason why I've just had the conversations more being in the Christian emo world, metal world and stuff like that, is that there comes to be a point in the crossroads where the way that Emery put it was, we could either keep playing churches and getting on radio, or we could keep playing bars, and we could keep going this direction. And at the time, the better business decision was to keep playing the churches and keep going to family events and things like this, because that paid a lot. Like we're the cool rock band that all the kids want to go hang out with. And at going the other route, we were sleeping in the van and we weren't doing a bunch, but we decided like we didn't want to compromise necessarily. And at the time, I don't know where they stand now. I don't think they do this as well, but at the time they were thinking, well, there's also more ministry over here than right here. We're just reiterating the same stuff to these Christians over and over again. Like we'd rather have more conversations over here. And I think that that type of crossroads gets to be a lot for people in the Christian realm. I think so someone like Hog Nelson, like they may have got to that point and been like, you know what, maybe not necessarily for the sake of comfortability. They just chose the other side. And they were like, we want to hang out more at churches. We want to encourage Christians. We want to build them up. We want to do, so like, not that one's right or one's wrong, but I think maybe from a business and production standpoint, once you lean heavy into the church scene, you're going to be produced more like that music.
I mean, it has to be a business decision at some point. There's a guy that used to lead worship at Mars Hill in Seattle named Dustin Kinsrew, which we still sing some of his songs. But that whole like worship team at Mars Hill, well, I say the ones that did songs, you could tell they were different than a normal Christian contemporary influence worship team, right? So they're writing their own stuff, and it's like super indie.
Yeah.
I think what it is so Dustin Kinsrew is the lead guy for a band called Thrice, which is a very heavy band. I was listening. I remember I had Thrice playing when we were like 6.5 years ago when I was working on the house we're in now, and just had it on a speaker, right? It was just like, I think I don't know, I was doing scraping popcorn or something. Yeah. Cammy walks in and she was like, what are you listening to?
Why are you so mad?
Like heavy, yeah.
Is this Stephen Curtis Chapman?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
So like, I have a feeling that Dustin Kinsrew,
I like Stephen Curtis.
Writing songs for church, whether it's worship or just church in general, there's no way he's not influenced by the way he played music outside of that, right?
Right.
That's different than a kid who grows up in the special music culture and then that becomes his career, right? So that there's no influence of any music outside of the low bar of quality that you've grown up in, right? Yeah. When you are in the music world outside of the special music culture, which I'm going to differentiate that's not every church. Right. Yeah. That has changed drastically now. Some of the best musicians I know play on worship teams. Yeah. They also play in other stuff too, but like that culture has changed drastically. Yeah. But if you grow up in what I'm calling the special music culture, there's no press for you to be better, right? So if you're in a band like Thrice, you've had to work to get to that place. Yeah. You're not just a mediocre lead frontman. You are someone who is really good, right? Yeah. That I think that influences your how you write, how you play. So here we go. I grew up in the special music culture. That's the world I grew up in, right? Yeah. I was not super interested in music, funny enough. I'm actually the worst musician in my family. My brother and sister are much better musicians than me, and I'm the only one who does it like for a living, which is really funny. I don't think people would say I'm a terrible musician, but I'm not a phenomenal writer. I'm not a phenomenal guitar player. I feel like I'm very competent as a worship leader. And I think there's other reasons than just music that make me competent as a worship leader.
Yeah, there's more that figures into it.
Right. So I'm not trying to put myself in a quality conversation with someone like Dustin Kinsrew or John Foreman, or even like these worship leaders who tend to be kind of in the CCM world, who I think are really good writers, like Phil Wickham, right? Like, so like I'm not anywhere close to that. And I think part of that is because I grew up in the special music culture. I was never forced. I didn't have to be better than I am. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like musically, Matt Bramlett, I grew up with, played in a band together when we were in high school and early college. And Matt's like one of the best musicians I know. Like he's a phenomenal guitar player, like an incredible writer. It was just, Matt, we had lunch a few weeks ago and we were talking about it, how it was just two different value systems. Yeah. I wanted to play soccer. Yeah. He wanted to play guitar. Right. Yeah. So like, it was just two different value systems. So if you heard Matt's writings, like the songs Matt wrote and the songs I wrote, not from a worship perspective, but just from like a quality perspective, you're going to go, man, Matt's songs are way better than Micah's. See what I'm saying? Like Matt was forced to be better because of where their band went. Right. Yeah. I was not forced to have to write. My survival was not based on how good of a song I wrote. Right. I had no reason to have to become a really good writer. Right. So I think I'm using me as an example of probably what perpetuates for a lot of people a lack of quality. Yeah. I don't think anyone's trying to argue that I'm not a good worship leader, but I don't think it would be unfair for them to argue that I'm like a mediocre musician. Does that make sense?
Yeah. 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 We've had lots of meetings about that.
I know. And so that's what I think, is part of the problem, is that there's a lot of people like me who are mediocre musicians who are actually trying to make a living of being a musician. And so now you have a subpar
instead of being a worship
musician. Yeah. You know, worship leading's a different venue, because I know some people who are phenomenal musicians that are terrible worship leaders.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and there's, I think if you're a worship leader, there's a little bit of an element of pastoring in it, you know, and you're, and so that has to shape what you're doing and how you're doing it. Yeah, it's interesting. I'm curious as you say these things, like, I'm wondering if sometimes we as Christians, we put ourselves into narrow a field. And so, like, if I, for example, as an artist, a painter, if I only considered other Christian paintings, so like Thomas Kincaid, right? You remember his stuff? And it blew up in the 90s and the early 2000s. And
is this the, wait, which one? This isn't the one we looked at in Ruidoso, right? That's a different guy.
No. Yeah. So Thomas Kincaid, though, he studied light. And so he always had these pictures of these cottages and these like little wooded areas with light and light bouncing off the trees or whatever. And it became so big. There were Thomas Kincaid puzzles. There were Thomas Kincaid rugs.
That's right.
You'd walk into Family Christian store and there was Thomas Kincaid devotional books with with his cover on the front, or whatever.
Business decision.
It was huge.
Right.
Oh, well, don't take me down that rabbit trail. But like, I never liked his work. I was like, it's so contrived. It's so
cheesy,
boring.
Yeah.
And I wonder sometimes why we as Christians settle for mediocrity. And I think it's almost like,
because they're Christian.
I think it's a false humility. Like, oh, look, like, we're not trying to be something special. We're like low like Christ, and we're just humble, and I don't know what it is, but like,
I think it's actually because he's a Christian.
Yeah.
So like,
yeah, that's great.
This guy's a believer. Wow, we love his work. Instead of his
wow,
this guy's a believer. He's like a mediocre painter.
Yeah. Well, you know what ended up happening? A lot of people don't know this. So he was cranking out so much work. It got to the point where he had a studio. Okay, let me say this differently. This is what I've heard, and I've heard it from multiple sources. It has been years since I've looked at it. So if I'm wrong, I'm wrong.
Couldn't be, yeah.
What I've heard from multiple people is that he ended up getting a studio full of people who knew how to paint his work. And he was producing them so quickly because he wasn't the only artist creating a Kincaid. And so I think that's the thing that was boring to me about it, is like every piece looked the freaking same. And I would go into
it's a business decision.
It's business. And there wasn't the desire to create art in it. There was the desire to be I
think that's what I mean is like, well, okay, let's take the business out of it. Because you kind of understand, like, someone's like, okay, this is working. Like, right. So just from the art perspective, I really do think it's music, painting, any kind of art.
The visual arts, I think, with the
okay, ready?
Videos and TV
Facing
shows.
the Giants.
Yeah.
I think people are like, oh my gosh, Christians finally made a movie.
Yeah.
And we're going to, and it blew up because people are renting out the theater.
Yeah.
So now there's this false sense of success with a movie that's mediocre because so many people were excited about it because it was a Christian movie. I think that is, you might be right with the false sense of humility. I think it has more to do with us wanting things to be Christian rather than to be quality.
Yeah, that's a great point.
To be good.
Yeah.
So just because there is a Christian offering for us, here's a Christian music offering, here's a Christian movie offering, we're going to gravitate to it because it's Christian and it's not supporting Hollywood. Ooh.
Which that's fine with me.
No. Look, I'm with you. But in the 80s and the 90s, there was a big move in some of the churches I was in. It's like, we got to destroy Hollywood. And so like, we need to create our own content. And I think that there was maybe people were like, yeah, let's create content that counters. So like when I was growing up, like Petra was for some people an answer to like, if you were listening to Wayne Watson, which I liked, and if you were listening to,
I know his son.
Who was it? Somebody Green. There was a Green dude.
Steve
Green.
Steve Green,
Yeah. And if you were listening to Ray Boltz, now Gay Boltz. And if you were listening to Stephen Curtis Chapman, which I liked all those guys. I had all those tapes. I did.
Yeah, that's right.
Do you remember you could buy the wooden tape thing that hung on your wall?
I was about to say, I had one that was like from the floor up.
Yeah.
And we went.
Yeah, like a tower.
Yeah.
I had the one that hung on the wall. It held 100 tapes. And I had it almost all the way full.
We had the drawers.
You just said that. I kind of want to get tapes again.
Oh,
Right.
dude.
There's part of me that like just now, like I want to find like a tape player again and
listen
find
to
a
just
tape.
Yeah.
So,
Dude, how epic would that
I
be?
do. Whenever we go to a town that has like a half price books or something, I'll look for like either albums or soundtracks or stuff that I know I like, and I have like a laser disc of Jurassic Park. I'm never gonna play that laser disc, but I'm like, that feels nostalgic. And
yeah. Well, but like Petra Beyond Belief, that was like my hardcore stuff, you know. And I know, in like 1987,
but it was
or 1988.
But it was influenced by 80s rock. Like
and there were a lot of people who were against it because it was influenced by 80s rock.
Yes.
Because it was like, oh, it's rock.
Oh. Is that what you're after?
Yeah. So I'm wondering if like we have worked so hard to distance ourselves from culture that we've sacrificed quality.
Yes. Okay.
That's a great point.
Let's go down that road. I will say this as a caveat. There you go, Colin. No, he's nuance, right? That's what he always says. Nuance. He always says
Caveat's a new one.
Caveat's a new one.
Yeah.
The caveat to that.
What's your simpler pod drinking game?
Andrea. The caveat to that is that culture has changed within the church.
Yeah.
And maybe it's a megachurch movement. I don't know what it is, but there are a lot of really quality artists in the church now. So that has changed. Because I don't feel that anymore where the church is like, we're trying to keep the world out, if that makes sense. So that has changed, but I think we still are feeling the effects of that. So I think you're right. We tried so hard to not be like the world that maybe that influenced how we did things. So it's like our music can't sound anything like the world, even though every Christian contemporary song sounds a little bit like a country song.
I could be wrong about this. I think it was Shane Bernard. I think it was a Shane and Shane album that we were listening to years ago when I first moved here, and we were in your apartment that you shared with Abs and Mac. And I remember asking you, like, because there's a place where he does like this strum that's crazy, and I was like, that's cool, right? Like, that's impressive, right? And you're like, oh yeah, like that's hard to do because it was like in one beat or something. I forget I don't know any of the stuff, right? But you were like, yeah,
I still can't do it.
Yeah, and that's what you said at the time. You're like, this is like, he's a really, really good guitarist. And so I think Shane Bernard, and I knew him personally, he's not dead, so I guess I still technically know him, but like hung out in my apartment a couple of times, knew him personally, and worked with his brother Justin Bernard at a coffee shop, and so like kind of knew them. But he was the first Christian artist that I knew was good. Like I knew he was good because other musician friends of mine who played, Justin Cofield, who was a friend of mine who led worship at First Baptist Lubbock and then also for Paradigm, and then led worship for a lot of years, even in Austin for a few years, was the worship pastor there. Like he was a good guitarist, but he would say, no, like Shane's good. So he was the first time I ever realized this is good.
Yeah.
This guy is good. Like there's skill there. And to your point, like he worked at it. This is not something that he got to by accident. This is something that he did all the time.
He's like crazy talented.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing too, is I think that the special music culture is not actually looking for talented people. It's looking for willing people.
Willing. Yeah.
And I'm not going to say it's wrong. I think it's dumb. I think it's dumb for a lot of reasons, because it's not glorifying to God to say like, well, this kind of sucks, but it's good enough.
Well,
right? Like it's not glorifying to God by any means. Two, it's kind of embarrassing for the person if it's really bad. Like I remember listening to some special music growing up, and even as like a kid, I was like, "Ugh, like, this is really bad."
You're bringing up trauma for me, because when I was 10 years old at Wilshire Park Baptist in Midland, Texas, the lady that was singing the special music, and again, I don't have a musical ear. I don't have any music in me at all. I like to sing because I enjoy music, but I can't understand it or anything, and so. This lady's singing, and all I knew was it was bad. Like her voice was cracking all over the place, and I was feeling sorry for her. Like I was like, oh man, I feel sorry for her. And I looked over, and my mom is working so hard to stifle a laugh, and me seeing her stifling a laugh made me start laughing so hard. And I still feel guilty about it to this day. I can picture the lady's face. You? Oh yeah, I can picture the lady's face on the stage, and like people are turning around to look at me, and I'm just like, I felt like the biggest turd, and I still think about that. Like,
ouch.
Yeah.
And kind of funny.
So,
okay,
it was
you proved my point. Like she doesn't deserve that, right?
She doesn't deserve that.
It's exactly the same as like the first few seasons of American Idol, when the whole goal was to get some really bad people in there. So that's what it felt like to me. It's you're perpetuating this idea with people that is good enough. Even if you suck, it's good enough. And I don't think that's healthy in any venue.
Well, because I think what we've done is we've said, like, and this isn't wrong, but biblically we say like God is more concerned about the heart. I don't disagree with that. But if you're creating content to be consumed, you ought to be, God's concerned about the heart, but you ought to be concerned a little bit about the quality if you're creating content to be consumed.
Yes. Yeah, I mean,
one of the things that the person who brought this up to me, they had started watching The Chosen, and like, I just can't stand it. The lighting is terrible. They said the costumes like are brand new out of the wrapper from Amazon, you know, and it's like they just ordered them, they just got them in from Amazon, they just unwrapped them. Like the Roman soldiers, like, okay, maybe they polished their stuff, but like, there's not a single scratch. There's not any dirt.
Yeah,
it's like everything's brand new. Like, come on, like. You're in the first century, like rough the sandals up a little bit, or like
to the point where we're excited. There's a show about Jesus that has some acceptance, and so there's a false sense of success because people are like, "I'm going to watch it because it's Christian." I still don't think it's wrong, but I think that's the reason that
just like, a low bar,
low quality gets perpetuated is because there's a sense of like, "Oh, this works."
Yeah. What I'm curious too with like things like that is I think it's accepted because of the low bar. 100%. I agree with you what you're saying for sure. I'm curious if it's inexperience or if that type of stuff is intentional. like if it is like
inexperience.
Sorry. Yeah.
No, you said it right. I just thought maybe you said an experience. No, I'm with you. Yeah.
Like, because I was trying to think. I'm racking my brain. Like, why would they do it that way? And I think like how many, like for instance, the costumes, like the costumes being brand new or whatever. Like is it just an experience, just not thinking about that? Because I understand. I mean, even with huge productions, like continuity errors happen. There's a car going by in the background of Lord of the Rings. Like things happen that people don't catch, they don't know. That's a big one, especially if it's consistent with every episode. So is it intentional? Are they doing it on purpose? Because I know that with like one of the huge things that I see The Chosen in is still images and calendars and posters and things like that. So are they using like really high quality, good looking things because people are going to be taking still images and clips from it all the time?
You mean like the reason their costumes are clean?
Yeah, like they're not using dirty things to perpetuate whatever. Like I was trying to rack my brain.
How
would
that change the pictures?
I have no idea. Like I'm just trying to think of anything. Like why would there be like because that type of stuff is and the reason why I harp on the costumes or whatever is because that is so imperative from a lot of conversations that I've heard with monumental directors and storytellers, visual storytellers, is that so much of the thing that they talk about is in order to tell a good story, you must make the story feel lived in. And they said that was one of the big differentiators of Star Wars was that he made a dirty space movie, and before that all the space movies were chrome and all this other stuff, and he's like, if I want to tell a story about people who lived in this world, they're not living in a perfect world. So that's the reason why I ask, like, is there intentionality behind it? Because it feels so obvious.
Yeah.
And maybe it's just not.
I feel like it's probably not. I feel like it's because they can.
You just get away with it. We don't need to hire more people to do this.
That's what I mean. It's like if you knew, like, all right, I'm gonna make 10 million
to keep up with. Like if you have a speck of dirt on a guy's face, you have to keep up with that every time you film
absolutely.
that.
So I'm thinking like tearing a shirt or whatever.
If I'm a multimillionaire because I make this show and I haven't had to put any extra work into changing anything, why would I, like, just again, business decision. It doesn't make any sense if I'm already doing well to like make it harder to make the same amount of money, right? So that's the same idea of perpetuating this low quality bar. That might not ever change because I think that, not wrong, I think that Christians are excited when there's like something Christian. So here's an interesting phenomenon to think about in that, and I think you've touched on it already, Micah, but I want to just throw this out there and get you guys' thoughts on it. We recognize, forget Christian for a minute, we recognize bad movies. We recognize bad TV shows. There was a TV show that started last year. Last year was its first season. Michelle and I started watching it because we're always looking for something new. We've exhausted all of our I know, it's so hard to find.
I know. And I hated it. And I was like, well, that's stupid. Well, that doesn't make sense. Well, the smart guy in the show is supposed to be really logical and really have intuition about people and math and all this stuff. It's like, it's going to be great. He's helping the police. There's like 45 shows like that where the smart guy's helping the police. But this one, like everything he did was dumb. I was like, this is the laziest writing. And after 2 episodes of it, it made me so angry. I was like, I cannot watch this show anymore. I hate the character we're supposed to care about. Like, I hate him. And so Mystery Science Theater, right? Like,
so good.
Yeah. And they're trashing these bad movies. And it's so funny. And it's hilarious. So we in culture recognize bad things and we enjoy them for how pathetic they are. But you bring the Christian movies in next to them and they're just as bad, but the Christians aren't mocking them. They're embracing them. And I think that that's such a weird thing that if you were to take the quality of a lot of the Christian content and put it next to the quality of the secular content, you'd mod the secular content and praise the Christian content. And I'm wondering if it is just what you're saying, Micah, that it's just because, well, it's a Christian option.
It's got to be. Or that's a huge factor, like a massive factor.
So I think, and I like ice cream. I like the latest scoop downtown.
Who doesn't?
Oh gosh, man.
They
Scott.
don't really have a lot of good non-dairy options.
No,
really?
but
and it's homemade, or it's like they make it there, which means it's like as bad as it could be for me.
You're gonna have to get a sorbet.
I'm the guy.
Yeah, you're gonna have to.
I do get it usually, and it's usually just like okay.
Yeah. But
I hate the latest scoop.
Their ice cream is so good.
You're right.
It is so creamy,
I'm sure it is,
and it's different than like a Baskin Robbins, which is good, man. I don't have any shame for Baskin Robbins. There was one around the corner from where I grew up. Like that was a special night for us after church. We'd hit Baskin Robbins on the way home.
I think it's a plural.
Baskin Robbins.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That's interesting.
I think it is. Yeah.
I think his last name is Robbins.
Okay, well, fine. I only like one of them, though.
Yeah, no. You come to find out it's not the chain. It's like some random guy.
Hello, I'm Baskin Robbins. You want some ice cream?
Their ice cream's mediocre because I've never had the real thing.
Right. So if a Christian ice cream parlor opened up here in town, and their ice cream was worse than Baskin Robbins or worse than the latest scoop, people would go, "Oh, we got to support the Christian thing." And I'm like, "Heck no! Go to get the better ice cream."
Yeah.
But why the low bar? Why don't we? Okay, I know nameless person who brought up this topic. I know that this is moving us away from it a little bit. I feel the same way about why do people tolerate pastors in the pulpit who aren't great teachers?
Agreed.
Like, what a low bar. Just because you're willing? Like, no, demand excellence.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know.
There's
give me the excellent ice cream.
I think there's the one of the things that might be a caveat to what you just said is that there is preference involved in all of this.
Yeah, of course.
So like someone might prefer a different ice cream over another, right?
Sure.
Someone might prefer a stoic kind of teaching to,
sure.
You see what I'm saying? Like, so I think someone might prefer music that, like, I don't know.
But I do think that stoicism does not negate quality necessarily.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
No, I agree. So then the preferences is within the style, not the quality. No, I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
That's a good
point. I think within music, like Christian music, I think there's a lot of, again, it's back to my premise at the beginning, there's actually a lot of really good Christian music. It just doesn't tend to be the stuff that you hear on the radio.
No, who do we need to be listening to?
I mean, I don't know if I want to make a list here just for like, just for issues of like,
Yeah.
But I think that there's a lot of good Christian music. It just doesn't tend to be the one that there's not as much everybody hears. I probably feel different than the nameless person on some of the worship.
Yeah.
Because my viewpoint, and it's probably obviously not something most people have thought about.
No, I think it's a great point.
Is that worship has a specific intention. So like I want the melody to be simpler because I want people to be able to sing it. There's a lot of songs, worship songs I really like that I probably won't ever lead with at the 456 because they are difficult to sing.
Yeah. Dude, yesterday, the little 4-year-old girl singing in worship. What was the first song you did yesterday? Do you remember?
I believe.
Yeah. She was belting it.
Which service?
Third, maybe. Her dad runs the gym.
Yeah. Okay.
Dude, she's been getting into it. Yeah.
Dude, so she was standing on her chair and she was like going and she was in it and she was singing it. And I believe, and she was singing,
That's
dude,
awesome.
like singing. And it was amazing. And then after worship, I guess she went back to the kids area, right? And so when they were leaving, I got down. She was wearing her birthday tiara yesterday, and I was like, "Is it your birthday?" And she goes, "Yes." And it wasn't sassy; it was just like confident and like, "Yes." And I was like, "How are you?" And she was like, "I'm 4." And she held up 4 fingers, and I was like, "That's awesome." So as she was leaving yesterday, I was like, "Hey, I heard you singing today, and it was amazing." I was like, "I loved it," because she was just
Just belting
And
it.
you know what? Somebody had commented to me later that said, I wish we could all be like that. Like just sing and just rejoice in it. And I told her, I was like, man, it was great. And I was like, I want to hear more of that. And she didn't look at me. She looked up at her mom and she goes, I like him.
Like, genius. And, genius.
But I loved it, man.
Yeah.
Like, and she was just,
and that's
your point. Here's a 4-year-old singing this
melody.
song.
Yeah. Right. And I don't think it's wrong to have more complicated worship music. I just don't, like historically, we'll say it that way.
Yeah.
It's never been the intent. Like, I imagine, I don't know what the Song of Moses was, or I don't know what, like the melody.
Yeah. Well, the lyrics are all over the place. So,
and I imagine because it's Jewish, it was complicated, right? So it's like, but
and you're going to turn to idols and you're going to abandon the Lord. And so I'll abandon you.
Or even like the Psalms, like these were put to music, but it's a cultural thing. But I think historically within probably the Western culture, we'll say at least that our songs have been simpler melodies on purpose. So I think that's well,
even some of the songs will say, some of the Psalms will say to the tune of, and though we don't know the tune, it was clear that they did.
Yeah.
So sing this psalm to the tune of a song you already know.
Yep.
And
you're familiar with it. Yeah, that's a good point. Because even if it's more complicated, it's something they knew.
They knew.
Yeah.
True, yeah.
And so I think that there are some worship songs that like I will just go to next. Like I probably know, but I don't even know if you guys know this. I on purpose spend hours every week on Spotify listening for new stuff, right?
Oh yeah, that doesn't surprise me.
And it is sad the number of times I hit next or the little minus button.
Yeah, like I don't ever want to hear that again.
Like, no.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of worship out now, which I think is amazing. There's so much to choose from. But like I think that there's a lot of good stuff out there, but there's also a lot of bad stuff too. So, but I'm going to gravitate towards songs that are theologically sound, in my mind are easy songs to sing, but yet still have what you were talking about earlier, Pierce. I don't want them to be like flat. I want them to still feel, I want them to feel a little bit like anthems or for the bigger songs. You know this about me. Like I've always liked emotive songs, like songs where you can like, okay, yesterday, the bridge of Christ Be Magnified.
I love it. It's one of my favorite bridges of any song.
It doesn't need a whole lot. And I don't know if you noticed this, Ryan, but it doesn't need a lot.
Probably not.
But it drives at a specific point in the bridge. Like everything comes down.
No, I definitely don't notice. I just like that part.
Won't be formed by idols. I'll stand strong and worship you. If it puts me in the fire, I would rejoice. So like that's like all the music comes down. I won't be formed by feelings. There's just this like step. You've come down to almost like zero in the music. And there's this step. It's kind of like you take a step forward. Like, I won't be formed by feelings. I'll hold fast to what is true. And then it's like you feel this tension in a positive way coming. If the cross brings transformation, I'll be crucified with you. And then it goes boom, because death is just a door. So it's emphasized. So that's what I'm looking for. Is I'm not looking for just theological music that goes flat. I'm looking for music where it's like
there's a progression. Yeah,
you feel what you're singing, right? Another example is which Phil Wickham song is it, where he sings the third verse twice, which he probably does that on quite a few songs.
I like a lot of his stuff.
But like where
Living Hope. Did you do it there too?
Probably. He probably does that in a lot of them, actually. One of them he does it where like it's the resurrection of Jesus, I think, but it hits. That's what I'm looking for. And I think that it's possible someone preference-wise can go, that's not my preference, right? But it fits from my take, this fits the intention of what I'm trying to do. And it is quality enough. And I know that kind of negates my special music thing earlier, but like what I mean by quality enough is quality where it's not like a cheesy thing. Like it might not be the same musical intensity or like skill level as playing something harder.
Well, it's a different intent.
Right.
Different intent.
But the in my mind, I'll say it this way, the quality is not just okay, the quality is really good because it is doing what it's intended to do. Right.
Yeah.
People probably don't notice this, but like I'm incredibly picky about the tones of songs. So like if someone plays with an 80s guitar tone and a lead part, I'm not playing that song. It's when Mark tried to play double kick in worship, I was like, we're not doing that, bro, right? Although I did hear a rendition the other day, one of those like memes on Instagram where they like play a worship song to metal, and I was like, that actually sounds really good. But like I want the quality of what's played to be amazing. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Well, and I think intentionality has to be brought into it, because what you're saying is like, even with a song that may be simpler according to most musicians in the world, or however you want to phrase that, you have an intentionality and a drive between every single aspect of it. And I even think about like, there's a band who's not believers. It's not a Christian, not a Christian band by any means. They have a song that I sing along to that I enjoy, that is like 4 chords with a slightly distorted guitar, and that's it. Like, and it's just, but his passion and his drive behind what he's saying draws me into it. So they have songs.
Isn't that the joke about Christians, that it's just the same 4 chords?
That's what I was gonna say, is that like, even
that's every pop song
like
ever.
Yeah, exactly. So like from his perspective, that there's a lot of intentionality that goes behind it, and I think a reason why that we don't feel that intentionality or whatever we want to say in regards to a lot of Christian music, is because what it feels like is a lot of people said, hey, here's 4 chords that work, here's a pad that works, write some of the buzzwords, talk about broken chains, talk about these things, and toss it in, and it's on radio. And that's what it feels like. It just feels like, it feels like all the people in the Thomas Kincaid.
I don't think it has to feel that way, because that's what it is.
Exactly, yeah. So like, the machine's just pumping it out. It's Thomas Kincaid Studios. The machine's just pumping it out.
It's why Air One changed from playing Christian rock to playing Christian worship.
So
it's what sells.
It's what sells, and it's
right now is what sells.
And that, I mean, and that's even, you've talked about it a lot as well. So about like an art perspective of like Hobby Lobby artists and stuff like that. Like, what's funny though is that you're not harping like the intensity or the level of the type of artist they are necessarily. So like,
I'll give you an example. So there's an artist that I know who's not a good artist. And I've watched their work for at least a decade, and it's not better. And the reason that they continue to churn out work is because a lot of their friends, they're a little older than me, but a lot of their friends have
like pretty old
money. Yeah. A lot of their friends have money, and their friends keep going, oh, I love it. I love it.
It's the same idea.
And so this person has the impression that they are a sought after artist because they sell a lot of their work, but they sell to their friends who keep buying their work. And it's just like, oh, but it's so bad.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious though, like, sorry, I keep talking back here. I'm curious though, like,
okay.
Like in that scenario, they're convinced that they're good.
Yes.
I'm curious if there's a lot of people who are just working the system just because like, cool, it pays. And like, they're not convinced they're good. I guess it could just be across the board.
You mean musicians?
Musicians, or even what we were talking about earlier, like visual arts and stuff
I'm not sure in the musicians context we're talking about, I'm not sure that's the case very often.
Yeah. They're not trying to game the system.
Yeah. They think they're good.
I think that you just have to say special music culture and it disproves it.
Yeah.
How many people got up on stage and were like, I'm not very good, but I'm going to do this anyways. There were some, but not the majority. The majority of them are like, man, I'm really good at this.
Yeah.
Listen to the applause I get. You actually, you're 100% right. What's funny is Katie's one of the ones who like wouldn't think that she was good, and she would get asked to sing certain songs, and she's like, I don't want to get up there. I screw this part up every time, and people say that they like it, and I know they don't like it. Or just like beat herself up during it.
That's funny.
But yeah, she's the only person I can think of, because you're right. People are like, I do this. This is what I do. Like I'm a singer, and yeah, you're right.
I am not a singer, but I love to sing. I love music. I have music on. If I'm by myself, I have music on. And
my girls have started like heavy music, which is a lot of fun for me.
That is fun.
They get rowdy too. Like Adeline will just scream and just like stomp around the house and like flap her arms, and then they'll run in circles together.
I've been thinking about your point earlier about like, we're trying to get the world out back in the day.
Yeah.
Like, I think we're still seeing some of that in how like the meme metal version of like a worship song. I don't remember what song it was the other day. When I thought this is actually kind of good. I also thought this would probably not ever work in most churches.
Mm-hmm.
So that plays into it, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So this is an acceptable, there's still an acceptable form of music across the board in churches, right?
Yeah.
Not every church is that way, but like even ours, like I think if I did a metal-ish song in our church, people would be like, what the heck are you doing? Flip it. If I did a country song in our church, everybody would love it. So it's contextualized to the culture, right? Yeah. So I don't think it has to, my point is, I'm not dogging on the churches for their preferences and style. What I'm saying is I think for a long time, there's been an acceptable form. Oh, let me say it another way. There's been non-acceptable forms of music that we're not going to allow into the church. And I think that maybe is part of it. So you have kids growing up as church kids who don't hear much music other than what's allowed.
Yeah.
So then you expect them to all of a sudden graduate and go off and then like have, you know, and again, that's changing because I think parents have changed their perspective on this. We're not as strict as, you know, we might not be playing our 80s records backwards for our kids, but you know, we're less worried about that now, I think.
Yeah.
I hope that's the case. I hope the goal of parents in regards to music is to help guide their kids through like what you should and shouldn't listen to based on your perspective of glorifying Jesus with everything you do.
Yeah, it's hard too, like what we mentioned earlier in regards to like, this is kind of a step back in the conversation, so I apologize, but you had mentioned like it's completely okay to hear a band or to see a movie or to do whatever and be like, oh, this is Christian, and be like excited, like, oh, that's cool. Like I remember hearing of bands, and like I was this church kid that grew up that heard it wasn't like very law-based necessarily in my household, but I heard what I heard. And like I was around, like I heard 90s country, 50s doo-wop, and Christian music. Those are the three genres that I heard. And
can you do a mashup of all those?
Dude, you're so sick. I'll find one for you. But like whenever I started getting into heavier music, a lot of the driving force was like, oh, these are people who are passionate about Jesus. Like a lot of me initially getting into it was like, wait a minute, you can love Jesus like that? That's cool. And so like, and then I started getting into it, and then I developed a more understanding of the scene and what's going on around it. But I was drawn to it because of the initial like, oh, I thought being a Christian had to look like this, and now it's like this. And I think that even now there's a point. I was listening to like my Discover Weekly or something the other day, and there was a line at the beginning of the verse. It was like, because you love Jesus. And I was like, whoa, what? Like, what's he singing about? Then I'm rewinding the song and listening, like, oh, that's dope. And it was actually a good quality song, but it still piqued my interest of like, oh, what are you talking about? Like now I'm plugged in more because you're talking about something that you're talking about something I relate to now. You're not just background noise. Now I'm plugged in. And so I'm curious, even like that's a pretty innocent response, but I think you're 100% right, Micah. That doesn't necessarily take away the fact that like people are praising mediocre things just because they're Christian.
I think that's the core of it. Is that the standard's really low because we're excited about them being Christian things.
Yeah.
Which if we can separate that in our mind, like I'm curious as like audience members, if we could separate that, like, yeah, they're not as technical as so-and-so, but I like, for instance, I think about like, I'm trying to think of typical alternative music, like Cutlass versus like Creed or something like that. Like, yeah, sure, you're not going to be selling out arenas like Creed, but I really like listening to Cutlass better because I like their heart behind it. Like, like as far as like as an audience separating those two things instead of being like, well, if you like Creed, you're going to love this band. Like, and that was the whole drive of like, if you go to the music section at Family Force 5, golly, at Family Christian store, it would say, if you love this band and they have a list of secular bands, then you'll like these bands.
Really?
Oh, dude, yeah. Oh man, so many tooth and nail
trying to get you away
like stickers
from the secular.
Yeah, exactly. But and like instead of having it all be about that, because I feel like that's a lot of the ways people live Christian life in general, is now that I'm a Christian, I've got to do Christian things. And I think if we strip away that mentality and be like, you can appreciate both these things, but if you if you want to jam Cutlass more because you want to sing about Jesus, dope, then do it. But we don't have to say this is like we are creating a whole new standard of quality based off of my preference in this moment. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I don't know how we could introduce that as a culture, but
I think a couple of thoughts. One, I also think that people who are not believers will probably not ever appreciate Christian music the same way that believers do because there's something else involved, right? So
that's true.
I think we have to like put that in the equation as well. There will always be a sense where I'm not talking about the bad stuff, like the really bad quality. I mean like there's a sense where someone's going to listen to a song and not feel the same connection, because of that. So I think that at least has to be something in the back of our minds. Like,
well, a song's telling a story usually, right? And so the reason that people get attached to love songs or breakup songs or whatever is because they're attaching it to a moment in their life. And so the Christian song that's bad in terms of quality, but still represents the story of who we are in Christ. But still, we have a point that we can connect to it.
There's a lot of bad worship songs.
Yeah.
I mean, notice we don't really sing any songs from the 90s at our church.
Yeah.
I call it like the dark era.
Yeah.
And that's total preference, right? There were some good ones, but it's total preference. I mean, one last thought would be like, I think that, and this is totally my opinion, I don't think we should be okay with mediocrity.
Agreed.
And let me just put it on like worship leaders who are like maybe picking musicians for the church. And this has always been the case for me. I'm not expecting someone to be like the best of the best. What I'm expecting them to do is be really good, like good enough and competent enough to play whatever we're playing. If someone's struggling through it, I'll just throw him under the bus because this happened. But like Mark Hatcher's a really good guitar player. He's not a very good drummer. Yeah. And he was like, one summer we were looking for a drummer. He's like, I could do it. And so we had him come practice and we played like half a song. And I was like, bro, this is not going to work. Like, and I'm sure it hurt his feelings, but like, I can't.
Wasn't his skill set.
No. And I can't have a mediocre drummer playing with me at something that has as much value as leading a bunch of people in worship. Like I don't understand that as a worship leader.
Yeah.
Why are you okay with just someone who's just okay being a distraction for something that has so much importance? It doesn't mean they have to be phenomenal, but they at least need to be competent enough to accomplish the goal of whatever you're trying to accomplish with the music behind the song.
Yeah.
I think there's too many worship leaders that are just looking for willing and able people. And I mean, I think I've been in that before where like I'm forced to play with musicians who just aren't that good. And it's difficult. You know what I mean? It's difficult to accomplish the goal. So I think we should have a higher standard as a whole of like, all right, Grayson, for example, it's my kid, so I don't mind like using him as an example. He's probably ready soon to like do worship for youth.
That's cool. I'm not.
He's going to be okay. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
He's not going to be very good for a while.
Yeah.
He's going to be okay. This is a venue where we're saying that's fine, right? Yeah. I'm not putting my son, who is probably better at leading worship than most of his peers. He's done it once.
Yeah.
That's more than most, right?
Yeah.
I'm not putting him on Sunday morning to lead worship, right?
Yeah.
Now, what I might do after a while, if he's good enough, is bring him up with me.
Sure. Yeah.
But because he's capable of doing it, I'm not going to say, hey, Grayson, why don't you lead worship for a song for us on Sunday morning?
Yeah.
Dude.
He's not good enough.
Yeah. That's a great point. And that's one of the ways that like, that's just how life works in general, practice wise. Like, I've been watching one of my nighttime things is just watching like bits and pieces of comedy shows and stuff like that. And hearing them talk about being a comedian and talking about the writing stage, talking about the open mic stage, talking about like the progression of where you're going, which is exactly what you're saying with Grayson. Like there's an aspect of, we spent a lot of time in his room and he's working through things and he's figuring those things out. And then it got to a point where, let's do a song at Glenn. Let's do that. Now, if given in a month, in a week, whatever, now it's to the point, let's do the youth group, man. So like same thing is we understand that progression in regards to practice of like, you're not going to sell out arenas right when you write your first joke, brother. But like, if you work at it, you can get up to arenas. You can get up
getting better.
Absolutely. And that's the intentionality behind it, right? Like the intentionality is I'm going to go in this, I'm going to progress, I'm going to grow, and I'm not going to remain stagnant, but I'm going to listen to the songs on Spotify every week. I'm going to push myself. I'm going to have the conversations. I'm going to think about the details about the work that I'm doing. And when it comes to the things of Christ, now it's with the heartbeat, not only just progressing ourselves, kind of what I'm saying about the comedians, but glorifying God in the midst of that. And so like now I'm saying, let's push forward in the midst of that. And I'm not saying, and what's funny is like, you glorify God on Sunday just as well as your son glorifies God at Glenn. And so like in that standard, it's not necessarily the quality, it's the heart behind it. Yep. You see the intentionality behind it, stuff like that as well. So like, I think that's a brilliant point to make that people understand in the realm of talent in general. And that's not saying that your son sucks. That sense that your son's getting there, that he's working. Yeah.
And I'm not willing to put him in a place where there's a requirement for quality.
Absolutely.
Because I'm leading this.
Yeah, absolutely.
If he's not there yet, right? and it's my kid too. If he let's just say in a year he's like, Dad, can I like lead some at church? Well, if he's not good, then no.
Yeah.
Right. And I would say that for anybody.
Yeah.
And hopefully that doesn't scare people off from like wanting to be part of the worship team. But like, if you want to be part of the worship team at the 456, the expectation is that you're at least good enough to play the music.
Yeah.
And if not, I can point you places to help you work that direction, but you're not going to play as part of the worship team if you're going to be a distraction.
Right.
Yeah. I like that.
I was also really picky on the road, Pierce. Like when, I don't know if you remember this in practice, but I would all the times tell people like, hey, don't play that. It doesn't work. Like, don't play that there. It's not going to work, because the goal is I'm leading worship, right?
Yeah.
The goal's not. So
that's funny. One of the things you had mentioned a second ago of like not working on like a Sunday morning, doing youth events, we had some songs where like we would do like the halftime breaks and like go into like a heavier moment. You could tell it like the youth room is so funny because they're worshiping hands up, but then all of a sudden when we do the halftime time, now it's like this. Where they're like into it, versus in a Sunday morning more typical church setting that becomes a distraction. It's like, well, what are they doing? This feels a lot heavier. Versus for the youth audience, now they're they just now they're sucked into it. So
which we will do that.
Shows intentionality. Yeah.
We will do some of that stuff.
It'd be fun, man. But like, it shows the intentionality of it's not just let me do this for the sake of doing it, or it's not just throwing something together sloppily because I can get away with it.
We actually were working on it. It was intentional. Yeah, you're right. Intentional.
Dope. I don't really know.
Simpler view. Don't live in the special music culture.
Yeah.
Fun discussion.
I like it. Yeah, it's interesting.
Do churches still do special music?
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I don't feel like it's as common as it was by any means.
We're going to bring it back, and we're going to have the cassette tape tracks. If you're going to play, if you're going to sing special music, you have to sing to a cassette tape track.
And if do
you know how you change the keys on those?
No.
There was a button.
I didn't know you could. There
was a knob on the cassette player that most sound guys had at churches that you could change the speed of the song, and it would change the key. So instead of, they couldn't say, can you play this in the key of A?
Right.
They would say, can you lower the key a little bit? And they would slow it down a little bit.
Just a little bit.
Or can you raise the key? They would speed it up a little bit.
Interesting.
So if no one signs up for special music, Ryan will do that week. Yeah.
Yeah, I got it.
We'll mess with the speed of the tape.
I sing all the time, man. I make up songs about what I'm doing every day. Like, dude, it'd be pretty easy.
I've gotten in a habit of that on Wednesday nights with the youth. I'll just sing whatever the next thing is. And I've realized this past week
that you're bad at
that I'm actually doing it to tunes of songs that I'm unaware of.
Oh, funny.
And so like I tell them to sit in the first 3 rows, because if I don't, like, they'll all sit at the bar. I'm like, well, get up here, come on. And so I was singing first 3 rows, and I was like, first 3 rows. And then it hit me about 5 minutes after that. I was like, that's the Garbage Truck song by Blippi that my kids listen to. And
that's
so
funny.
It was Garbage Truck. But there was one week where I did it, and it was
you could have said that's the Garbage Truck song by Blippi, and I would have thought that was some like hardcore thing from the 80s.
You know Blippi.
I actually had no idea what you were talking about.
Yeah.
That's the hardcore. That's the.
But
Garbage
there's a
Truck
new
song.
version with Elmo.
When you said
like
it's a Garbage Truck song, I think I was with you in the hardcore song. But then when you said Blippi, I was like, okay, this is something else.
I was like,
no,
I don't know who
just
Blippi
kid songs
is.
I've had in the background.
Like some like
Blippi's like a pop artist.
I've never heard of him.
There was one week where I did first 3 rows as country roads. My first 3 rows. So, and then slowly gradually, I realized that, the whole youth group, we all finished the course together.
Nice.
I was like, all right, let's jump in.
Yeah. No further back.
Yeah.
I like it.
I needed, You know who else? You know who I like? Steven. You know who I like? Ryan? I like Steven.
Yeah.
You know who I like? Steven. We're at the Garden Audio as always.
You know who I like? Steven.
Hannah texted me the other day, and she said they keep calling me. This is the way it should have been read. They keep calling me Pierce, but the way that I read it was they keep calling me Pierce, as if she was telling me they keep calling me. And I was like, well, what are they calling you? And then the conversation got super weird over text. And she was like, they keep calling me Pierce. I was like, yeah, what do they keep calling me?
Who was calling
Who's
her
on first?
So Hannah was picking up food that I had ordered online. And she had said, hey, I'm here. It was under my husband's name. And so apparently like the people that were there, they were gesturing to her as if she was me. And like, well, that's for Pierce. And so like in their minds, it makes sense. That's what all the paper says. And so they wouldn't change. They wouldn't explain that every time, but they're like Pierce, you're Pierce. So
she's not though.
She's Hannah.
Yeah.
They keep calling me Pierce. keep calling me Pierce. We love Stephen. Hey, check all the show notes out below. We've got links to all the ways you can get connected, get involved. You can connect with us through Simpler Bible, through Micah's ministry with Eagle's Wings, through our personal social medias, as well as our social medias for Simpler. So we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to interact with you on there. The Simpler community doesn't have to stop here through the podcast. You can get involved in lots of different areas. And so we'd love to be able to hear from you guys. What's your experience with Christian music? I remember talking to a bunch of people who like their experience was getting in like with Newsboys and DC Talk early on, like in the late 80s. And what Ryan said earlier, being like influenced by the 80s versus where they are like now. It's so drastically different. And so interesting. It's always interesting to talk about music with people. That was one of the questions I would ask when I would want to date somebody. What kind of music do you like? And if their answer, and this sounds really judgmental, but it was intentional. If their answer is like, I just put on K-Love, or, I really love Chris Tomlin. I go, okay, cool. And like, then we're still friends. I just know we're not going to date. I just know we're not going to go past that point. So what, are you a jerk like me? Curious to hear from you guys. Hey, as always, keep Christ as core. What could be simpler than that? We'll catch y'all next week. Bye.